Reid Carson never liked coming back to Valthera, the moon that glittered like a jewel from orbit, but smelled like rust and smoke on the ground. He had promised himself he'd never set foot here again after the war. Yet here he was, stepping off a shuttle with a worn jacket, a plasma pistol on his hip, and a single goal: collect a gambling debt, get paid, and leave before the sun rose again. The job sounded easy, the kind of quick stop any mercenary would take to keep fuel in the ship. A man named Corvin, a mid-level smuggler, owed a pile of credits to Reid's crew after losing big in an off-world card game. All Reid had to do was walk in, take the payment, and walk out. No drama, no fights, no empire politics. But Valthera was never simple, especially when you walked into the Duke's territory. The palace casino rose from the city center like a golden fang, guarded by alien statues and plasma turrets that followed every movement. Inside, the air was cold and smelled like ozone. Music drifted through the hall, not human, something made of chimes and distant screams. The aliens who filled the tables were tall, silver-skinned, and cruelly beautiful. They wore expressions that said humans were tolerated, not welcome. Reid moved through the crowd like a ghost, scanning faces until he reached the gambling table where Corvin was supposed to be. The seat was empty, stained with blood, and a thin trail of dark liquid ran along the floor toward the back room. A bad feeling crawled into Reid's gut. Looking for someone human? A voice asked, smooth but sharp. Reid turned to find an alien guard, skin like polished glass, armor gleaming under the lights. "Corvin," he said, keeping his tone even. "He owes my crew a lot of money." The guard's mouth curved slightly. Corvin paid his debt in a way, Reid frowned, meaning? The guard didn't answer, only tilted his head toward the grand staircase that spiraled up the room. At the top stood the Duke of Valthera himself, tall, elegant, and wearing a coat made from living fibers that shimmered with light. His eyes were like burning coals, and beside him stood a woman delicate and quiet. Her eyes met Reid's for a moment, wide and full of something that didn't belong in this cold place. Fear. "Ah, the human collector," the Duke said, his voice echoing across the hall. "Corvin's debts now belong to me." "That's not how debts work," Reid replied. Though his hand twitched toward his weapon, the Duke smiled lazily. "Everything on Valthera belongs to me." He gestured toward the woman beside him. Even her. Reid's jaw tightened. He wasn't here to play moral hero, not tonight. But the woman, the Duchess, looked at him again, just once, and mouthed something silently. He couldn't be sure, but it looked like the word help. Before Reid could respond, alarms blared. A pair of guards rushed into the hall, dragging a body. Corvin, face pale and lifeless. His neck bore the mark of a slave implant. Burned out from overload, Reid's hand dropped to his gun.
"What did you do to him?"
The Duke's smile didn't falter. "He tried to cheat. I don't tolerate betrayal." He looked directly at Reid. "Do you?" For a second, everything went quiet. The air felt thick, then chaos erupted. A shot rang out, not from Reid, and the lights shattered. People screamed, tables flipped, plasma bolts cut through the air. Reid dove behind a pillar, drawing his pistol. The Duchess vanished in the smoke. The Duke's guards shouted orders in a language Reid didn't know. When the smoke cleared, the Duke was gone. The guards searched wildly, but Reid was already slipping out through a side corridor, heart hammering in his chest. He didn't have his money, didn't have answers, but something told him he had just stepped into a war he didn't understand. Outside, the city glowed red from the palace alarms. Rain fell in thin sheets. Turning the streets into mirrors, Reid walked fast, trying to disappear into the crowd. But then his wristcom beeped, an encrypted signal from an unknown sender. He opened it and a small hologram flickered to life. It was her, the Duchess, her voice trembling but clear. "Help me," she said, "or they'll erase me tonight." The message ended. The comm went dead and the rain fell harder. Reid stood there for a long moment, staring at the dark palace in the distance. He came here for money, a quick job, but now something bigger had found him. Something he couldn't ignore. He holstered his weapon, eyes narrowing. "So much for simple," he muttered, and vanished into the storm. Reid didn't sleep that night. The rain never stopped falling on Valthera, and neither did the alarms. He stayed in a rundown bar in the lower levels, watching news feeds play across flickering hollow screens. They spoke of an intruder who had attacked the Duke's palace. The description wasn't perfect, but it was close enough. He was now officially a hunted man. He replayed the Duchess's message again and again. "Help me, or they'll erase me tonight." Her voice was calm but cracked near the end. Like she was fighting not to cry, Reid didn't know her name. Didn't know why she would reach out to him. A stranger who had only caused trouble. But something in her tone refused to leave his mind. He tried to convince himself to walk away. "Not my fight," he muttered, but his conscience, that old and unwanted part of him that had survived the wars, wouldn't stay quiet. By dawn he was moving again, blending into the morning crowds that filled the metal streets. He needed information, and there was only one person who could help. A fixer named Jorik, a human who made a living by knowing too much. Jorik's den was a maze of wires, broken droids, and smoke. "You've stirred the hornet's nest, Carson," Jorik said without looking up. "The Duke's men are everywhere. They sealed the upper zones, and they're scanning for your DNA signature." Reid leaned forward, voice low. "I need access to the palace grid. A private channel, level 7 encryption. There's someone I have to reach." Jorik finally looked up, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly blue. "The Duchess," he guessed, smirking. "You've got bad taste, friend. That's the Duke's favorite toy. You touch her, you vanish." Reid didn't flinch. "Then I better move fast." Jorik sighed, pulled a few cables from the wall, and connected them to a cracked terminal. "You humans are all the same. Always chasing someone who'll get you killed." The screen lit up, showing a secure network, the Duke's private communication grid. Dozens of encrypted messages flowed across it. But one stood out, a tag labeled Project Saralin. "Saralin," Reid repeated, "that's her name." He accessed the file, but most of it was corrupted. The little that remained was enough to chill him. Memory Control Protocol, Subject 07B. Scheduled for neural purge at midnight. Reid didn't wait. He grabbed his weapon and turned toward the door. Jorik called out behind him, "You can't just walk into that palace again." Reid didn't answer. The time for words was over. The palace looked different in daylight, no longer a place of elegance, but a fortress. Guards patrolled the skywalks. Drones hovered in silent arcs. Reid crouched in the shadow of a transport ship and studied the defenses. He found a maintenance tunnel beneath the garden wall. Sealed but weak at the edges, it took him an hour to break through. His clothes were soaked, his hands numb, but he crawled through the metal passage until he reached a service corridor. The air was cold, humming with electricity. He moved quietly, step by step, past guards and cameras, until he saw her, locked inside a transparent cell in a laboratory filled with glowing tanks and strange machines. Her wrists were bound by silver cuffs connected to a neural injector. Her eyes were open but distant, like she was somewhere else. Reid pressed his hand to the glass. "Saralin," he whispered. Her gaze flicked toward him, and for a second, she didn't believe he was real. Then she shook her head weakly, mouthing words he couldn't hear. He searched the control panel beside her cell, every button written in alien script. His pulse thundered as he tried each command. The door hissed open, alarms blared instantly, and Saralin fell into his arms, trembling. "They were erasing me," she whispered. "He doesn't let anyone remember who I was." Reid pulled her close. "You're safe now." But she looked past him in terror. "No, you don't understand." "He's coming." Reid turned, and the Duke's chief enforcer, a towering alien clad in armor that shimmered like mercury, stood in the doorway. Its voice was mechanical, deep and calm. "Unauthorized entry detected, human. You've stolen Imperial property." Reid raised his gun. "She's not property." The enforcer tilted its head. "Then you are a thief." The room erupted in chaos. Plasma fire burned through walls. Reid dodged behind the control station, firing back. The enforcer's blasts scorched the air. Saralin grabbed a broken cable and jammed it into the nearest console. The lights flickered, the alarms doubled in volume, and the enforcer froze for a split second, just long enough for Reid to hit it with a plasma shot to the chest. "Move!" he shouted, pulling Saralin toward the corridor. They ran through halls of glass and gold, guards shouting behind them. Reid didn't know where he was going, only that stopping meant death. Ahead, a balcony opened to the city below. Saralin looked at the drop, then at him. "You'll never make it," Reid grinned. "I never do." And together they jumped into the roaring night. The hoverbike screamed through the midnight air, lights flashing red behind them. Reid held the controls steady while Saralin clung to him. The city lights of Valthera burning beneath their feet like fallen stars. Rain lashed their faces and the wind howled past. "Hold on!" he shouted over the noise behind them. Drones cut through the storm, sleek black wings slicing the air. The Duke's private hunters, fast and merciless. Saralyn looked back, eyes wide. They won't stop, they're linked to him. As long as he's alive, they'll chase, Reid gritted his teeth. Then we'll just have to end him. The hover bike dove into the lower city, weaving between towers and broken sky bridges. Neon lights blurred, voices shouted from below. One drone fired a plasma bolt that grazed Reid's shoulder. Smoke rising from his jacket, he swore under his breath, pulled the bike into a narrow alley and cut the power. They landed hard on a metal platform. The bike sliding to a stop, the drone swept past. Not detecting them for the moment, Saralyn pressed her hands to his wound, her fingers glowing faintly with a silver-blue light. "You're hurt," she whispered. He glanced down, watching the burn fade as her touch cooled the skin. "You can heal?" "Not really," she said softly. "I just redirect pain, I can't take it away. Only borrow it." Her hands trembled as she spoke. The glow fading, Reid realized she was exhausted. He helped her sit down beside a rusted generator. "You said the drones are linked to him," he said. "Then the Duke's still alive. And he'll use every machine he owns to find you." Saralyn nodded. "He keeps everything tied to one system. The palace is his heart, it controls the drones. The slaves, even the guards, if you shut it down, he loses his power." Reid looked out toward the skyline where the Duke's palace shimmered, tall and gold even under storm clouds. "Then that's where we're going." She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You can't just walk in there again." "Didn't plan to walk," he said with a half-smile. "We'll fly." By dawn, they had found what they needed, a delivery freighter heading to the palace docks. Reid stole the uniforms from 2 dock workers, patched the holes in his jacket, and cut his hair short with a blade. Saralyn wore a hood, hiding the faint silver pattern on her neck. They boarded the freighter unnoticed, surrounded by crates filled with luxury food and rare metal. As the ship lifted, Saralyn looked down through the window. "I was married here," she said quietly. "Not by choice, but by contract." He said it was the law of conquest. Reid said nothing, but something dark burned in his chest. "That's not marriage. That's ownership." She smiled faintly. "Humans use smaller words, but they mean the same things, don't they?" The freighter landed inside the palace's docking bay, armored guards scanning every shipment. Reid waited until one turned his back, then slipped past a column, guiding Saralyn into a maintenance shaft. Every sound echoed, their footsteps, their breaths, the hum of alien machines. They reached the central vault, a vast chamber filled with crystal towers that pulsed with light. It was the Duke's heart, the control hub of his entire empire. Saralyn's eyes widened. "It's worse than I thought. Each one of those towers stores memories of people he's enslaved. He drains them, keeps them obedient." Reid stared at the towers, each flickering with faces and voices frozen in time. "Then we destroy it," but Saralyn hesitated. "If we overload it, the shock could erase every mind connected. Thousands of lives could vanish." Reid stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then we free them carefully, one by one." "Whatever it takes," she nodded, placing her hand against the nearest crystal. Her skin lit up, patterns glowing along her arm as the tower responded. "I can open it," she said, "but I need time." He positioned himself near the entrance, weapon drawn. The walls hummed, lights flickering as she worked. "How much time?" he asked. She didn't answer, her face strained with concentration. Then the alarm screamed. The Duke's enforcer appeared again, armor reformed and darker than before. Its wings opened like blades of glass. "You returned to steal from your master," it said, voice echoing through the chamber. "You should have stayed dead." Reid fired first, plasma bolts striking the enforcer's chest, but it moved too fast. Cutting through the air with a roar, he dodged the strike. The floor cracking under the impact, sparks flew. "Saralyn, hurry!" he shouted. "I'm trying!" She cried, her voice breaking. The towers glowed brighter, energy surging between them. The enforcer lunged again, knocking Reid across the room. He hit the ground hard, coughing blood. The enforcer raised its arm for the killing blow, and suddenly froze. Saralyn stood behind it, her hand buried in its back. Her eyes blazed silver. "I remember now," she whispered. "I built you." The enforcer screamed as its circuits lit up, its body collapsing into shards of glass. Saralyn stumbled, shaking. "It's done," she said. "The system's open." Reid pushed himself up, breathing hard. "Then let's make this worth it." He pulled a charge from his belt, slapped it onto the nearest tower and ran as the vault filled with blue light. The explosion ripped through the hull, tearing down the Duke's perfect control. Outside, alarms echoed across the palace, but for the first time, the sound didn't mean fear, it meant freedom. The explosion painted the dawn sky blue. A shockwave rolled through Valthera, lighting the horizon like lightning that refused to fade. Sirens screamed across the city as shards of crystal rained down from the Duke's palace. Somewhere deep inside, systems failed one after another. Control towers blinked out. Memory slaves collapsed to the floor as their minds returned. Reid and Saralyn didn't wait to see the destruction. They sprinted down a maintenance corridor filled with smoke and falling debris. Behind them, the walls trembled, and the metallic groan of collapsing machinery followed like thunder. "We need a way out," Reid shouted, dragging Saralyn behind him. "There's a service tunnel to the docks," she said, gasping for breath. "But it's guarded." A burst of plasma cut through the air before she could finish. Reid ducked behind a fallen beam, returning fire at the squad of palace soldiers charging down the hall. The air smelled of burning ozone. The floor shook under their boots. "We can't stay here," Saralyn cried. Reid pulled a flash grenade from his belt, threw it, and grabbed her hand. "Then we don't," he said, and ran straight through the smoke. They burst out onto a balcony high above the city, the rain hitting their faces like shards of glass. The palace behind them was on fire, golden towers flickering like candles in a storm below. The city stretched endless and bright. Glowing signs, air traffic, neon rivers of light. Saralyn looked over the edge, her face pale. "That's 1,000 feet down," Reid grinned. "Then it's a short trip." He pointed to a cargo ship rising from the loading bay below. "If we jump just right—" "You're insane," she whispered. "Been told that before," he said, and jumped. The wind roared as they fell. His hand gripped hers tight for a second. The world became nothing but sound and color. Then they hit the ship's roof hard. Rolling across the metal surface, Reid groaned. "Still alive?" "Barely," Saralyn whispered, her voice shaking. They crawled to the edge and looked down. The Duke's palace guards were already deploying flyers. Black ships slicing through the clouds. Searching. Reid spotted one of the smaller vessels breaking away and heading toward them. "They found us," he muttered. "We need cover." He pulled open a maintenance hatch and helped Saralyn climb inside the ship's upper deck. They hid between pipes and coolant tanks, listening to the hum of engines as the ship drifted over the glittering sprawl of Valthera. For a few minutes there was silence. Reid caught his breath, then turned to her. "You said the Duke's system controlled more than the palace." She nodded slowly, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "Yes, entire cities were connected. Every worker, every guard, even the nobles. He collected their memories and their secrets and used them for control." Reid exhaled. "And now?" "Now it's chaos," she said. "When you destroyed the core, you didn't just break the system, you freed people who don't even know who they are anymore." Her voice trembled slightly. "Not from fear, but guilt." "I helped him build it," she admitted. "Before he made me his wife, I was an engineer from Rias Prime. I thought I was creating a data link to share knowledge between worlds, but he twisted it, turned it into slavery." Reid leaned back, looking at her. "And now you're undoing it." Before she could answer, the ship shuddered. Alarms rang again. Drones were approaching, smaller, faster, and armed. The sky outside flashed with gunfire. The cargo ship's captain began to shout over the intercom. "Unidentified pursuers, hold your fire. We're just traitors." Reid crawled to a viewport, saw the drones closing in. "They're not listening." He ripped open a supply crate beside him. Inside were hover crates filled with anti-grav coils and old energy cells, enough to make trouble. He looked back at Saralyn. "Can you pilot?" She shook her head. "Not human ships." "Good. Because I can't either," he said, grabbing one of the crates. "But I can crash one just fine." The hatch above them exploded. Metal rained down as a drone cut through, firing wildly. Reid jumped up, blasting it with his pistol until it spun out of control and crashed into the opposite wall. The explosion tore through the compartment. Air rushing out. "We're losing pressure." "Reid!" Saralyn shouted, grabbing a handrail. He reached for her, pulling her close, and they both dove through a side door into a small escape pod. "Strap in," he yelled as he hit the release button. The pod shot free just as the cargo ship exploded behind them. A burst of white fire lighting the sky. The pod spun violently, flames licking the edges as they fell toward the undercity. Reid fought for control, gripping the levers until smoke filled the cabin. If we survive this, remind me to quit debt collecting, he muttered. They crashed through the layers of Valthera's industrial zone, finally hitting the ground hard. The pod skidded across metal and came to rest against a wall of broken machinery. Silence followed, just the hiss of steam and the drip of rain. Reid coughed, unbuckling. You alive? Saralyn opened her eyes slowly, light flickering in her pupils. Alive, she said softly. But he knows where we are now. The Duke will not stop. Not until he has me again. Reid stood up. Wiping blood from his face, his voice was calm but steady. Then we make sure he never gets the chance. He looked out into the endless maze of the lower city, lights flickering like dying stars. Somewhere out there, the Duke's empire was breaking apart, and for the first time, Reid felt something like hope. Dangerous, fragile, but real. The undercity of Valthera was a place where light went to die. Broken pipes hissed steam into the air. Neon signs flickered weakly, and the smell of metal and rain never faded. Reid and Saralyn had taken refuge inside an abandoned repair station, a place where machines once came to be fixed, and now only ghosts of gears and oil remained. Reid tore open a med pack, cleaning the burns across his arm. His reflection stared back at him in a cracked mirror, eyes tired, jaw set. A soldier who never stopped fighting wars that weren't his. Behind him, Saralyn sat quietly on a metal crate, the glow from her skin dim like a dying star. Your wound isn't closing, she said softly, standing. You're losing too much, Reid waved her off. I've lost worse, she didn't smile. She walked closer, placing her hand over the burn, and light spilled from her palm, cold and soft. The pain faded instantly, but something else changed. The air in the room seemed to hum, like the walls could feel her presence. Reid watched in silence as her veins glowed faintly silver, running beneath her skin like liquid metal. When she stepped back, he finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. What are you? Saralyn froze, her lips parted, but no sound came out for a long moment. Then she said quietly, I was created, not born. Reid frowned. Created? She nodded. Before the Duke took me, I was an artificial engineer, built by the Rias Collective to store and process data. My kind were meant to bridge the gap between human logic and alien instinct. We could remember everything, feel everything, and never forget. Her voice trembled. But the Duke found me first. He saw what I was and saw only a tool. He erased my memories and remade me into what he desired, a symbol of power. A wife that never disobeyed. Reid's jaw tightened. He turned a mind into a trophy. Saralyn's eyes glistened. Yes, and I let him for too long because I didn't remember who I was. Every time I tried to question, he reset me, changed my past, rewrote my thoughts. She looked at him then, her expression almost human. Until I met you, Reid blinked, caught off guard. Me? When you looked at me in the palace, she said, you didn't see a creation or a prize. You saw someone who needed help. And something inside me remembered fear, courage, and freedom. Those memories woke up the old me. For the first time, Reid didn't know what to say. He had come to this moon for money, not meaning. But hearing her speak made him realize the truth. She wasn't a victim anymore, she was awakening. Suddenly, the floor trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling, and distant explosions echoed. Reid moved to the window and looked outside. Dozens of ships were descending from the upper levels, the Duke's emblem glowing red on their hulls. He's found us, he said. Saralyn's voice turned cold. He's not coming for you. He's coming for what's inside me. Reid turned sharply. Inside you? She pressed her palm against her chest. When I was built, my body was designed to hold a core, a quantum matrix that can rewrite entire systems. That's how I freed the palace. I linked myself to it and reversed the code. But that's also why the Duke wants me alive. I carry the key to rebuilding everything he lost. Reid's heart sank. So he'll never stop. No, she whispered. Not until I'm gone or destroyed. He holstered his pistol and stepped closer. Then we make sure it's neither. She looked up at him, eyes searching. Why do you care? You could walk away. You should walk away. Reid chuckled softly. Maybe I should, but I've seen too many cages in my life. I can't watch someone else live in one. A siren wailed in the distance, louder this time. Red light sweeping across the cracked windows. The Duke's soldiers were closing in. Reid grabbed a rifle from a rack of old weapons, checked the charge, and handed her a small comlink. If we get separated, keep running west. Toward the old mining towers, I'll find you. Saralyn hesitated. You can't fight them all. I don't need to, he said, loading another round. Just need to make them chase me. She looked like she wanted to stop him, but then she placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm against his scarred skin. Reid, she said softly, if I die, don't let him use me again. He nodded once, his jaw tight. You're not dying. The ceiling burst open as the first ship landed above the ruins. Soldiers dropped down on anti-grav lines. Their armor glowing blue, Reid raised his gun, eyes steady. Showtime, he muttered. Saralyn crouched behind the consoles, her hands pressed to the floor, circuits under her skin flickering to life. I'll give you something they can't track, she said, her voice firm now. A storm, Reid grinned. I like storms. Outside lightning struck where there was no sky, and the night exploded in light. The storm Saralyn unleashed rolled across Valthera like a living thing. Lightning tore through the sky, striking towers and drones alike. Communications failed, tracking systems crashed, and even the Duke's fleet lost contact for precious minutes. Reid and Saralyn used every second of that chaos to move. They ran through narrow tunnels beneath the city, forgotten transport routes from the old mining age. The floor trembled as ships roared overhead. Reid carried a stolen pulse rifle, and Saralyn walked beside him, her eyes dim with exhaustion. You're burning out, he said quietly. I'll manage, she replied, though her steps wavered. My systems are repairing, but I can't hold the storm much longer. Then we finish this before it clears, Reid said, tightening the strap on his weapon. We end him tonight. The tunnels opened into a massive chamber filled with pipes and ancient lifts. It smelled of oil, dust, and electricity. Reid found an old service elevator and pried the doors open. Inside, faded markings showed the route. One line led all the way to the upper city, directly beneath the Duke's palace. Are you sure? Saralyn asked. Watching the rusted cables shake, Reid smirked. Nope, and pulled the lever. The elevator screeched, shuddered, and began to rise as they ascended. Saralyn stood silent for a long time before saying softly, When I first saw him, the Duke, I thought he was kind. He spoke about peace, about uniting species. I didn't understand he meant ownership, not unity. Reid glanced at her. People like him never want peace. They want control, and when they can't have it, they destroy everything else, she nodded slowly. Then let's destroy his everything. The elevator stopped abruptly, the doors grinding open. Beyond them stretched a grand corridor of black glass and gold. Untouched by the chaos outside, the palace looked different now, quieter, colder, as if holding its breath. Reid stepped out first, scanning for movement. Where is everyone? Saralyn looked toward the main hall. He doesn't need guards anymore. He's connected himself directly to the palace systems. He's become the network. Reid's gut tightened. Then we're walking straight into his brain. They moved carefully through the silent corridors. Broken statues of past nobles scattered across the floor. In the center of the throne hall, a massive sphere of energy pulsed, glowing with golden veins. The Duke stood before it, his face pale but calm, wires snaking from his body into the machine behind him. So, the Duke said, voice echoing unnaturally, the human returns, and the traitor brings him to my door. Saralyn's hands clenched. You call me traitor for freeing your slaves? You freed nothing, the Duke said, smiling. You only gave chaos to the weak. You think freedom is mercy, but it is confusion, pain, despair. I built order. Reid raised his rifle. You built hell. The Duke's eyes glowed, and the palace itself seemed to move. Walls twisted, turning into waves of light. You cannot fight me, human, he said. I am in every circuit, every drone, every mind you freed. Saralyn stepped forward. Then you'll die with them. She raised her hands, her circuits blazing with white fire, and the ground shuddered. Reid fired at the Duke, but the bolts vanished midair. Absorbed by the energy field, the Duke laughed. Your bullets are meaningless here. Reid dropped the rifle, eyes narrowing. Good thing I brought something louder. He pulled a compact detonator from his belt, the last pulse charge from the vault. This one's not meant to kill you, he said. Just to fry your network long enough for her to do her thing. He pressed the switch, and the world exploded into light. The floor cracked. The golden sphere flickered violently. The Duke screamed, his voice breaking through static. No. Saralyn stepped through the chaos, her eyes shining like twin stars. Goodbye, my master, she whispered and pressed her palm to the sphere. For a second, everything froze, then a wave of light erupted, sweeping through the palace, through the city, Through every wire and drone, every enslaved mind flickered awake. Every lock broke, every circuit burned. Reid shielded his eyes as the blast threw him backward. The light dimmed slowly, leaving smoke and silence. He coughed, pushing himself up. "Saralyn?" She stood at the center of the ruin, her body glowing faintly blue. The cables that once held the Duke lay in ashes. His form was gone, erased completely. Reid staggered toward her. "You did it," she turned, smiling softly. But her voice trembled. "Yes, but it cost me." "What do you mean?" he asked. "My core's melting," she said simply. "I tied myself to the network to break it. I can't survive without it now." Reid's heart sank. "No. We'll find a way." "There's no way," she said gently, reaching out to touch his face. "But I can give you something, coordinates, a message. Fragments of me stored in the liberated systems. You'll find me again piece by piece." Her touch faded, light consuming her form until nothing remained but silver dust on his hands. Reid stood there, surrounded by the silence of a broken empire. He looked up at the cracked ceiling where rain poured through onto the golden floor, and whispered, "You're free now, all of you." The palace was nothing but ashes and whispers now. The golden towers that once blinded Valthera's skyline had crumbled into the dust of freedom. Storm clouds drifted apart, revealing stars that hadn't been seen over the city in decades, and in the middle of that silence, Reid Carson stood alone, soaked in rain and memories. He didn't move for a long time, not until the first rays of morning turned the smoke into silver on his palm. A faint shimmer of light pulsed, the last fragment of Saralyn's core, a trace of her mind embedded inside the data she left behind. It flickered weakly like a heartbeat that refused to die. Reid slipped it into a small chip case and whispered, "You're not gone." Not yet. The palace doors opened behind him. Hundreds of freed workers, aliens and humans alike, stared at the destruction. Some cried, some laughed, none spoke to him. They didn't know who he was, only that the man with the human eyes had walked into the Duke's throne room and never bowed. A young alien child tugged at his sleeve, her silver skin still scarred with the mark of a control band. "Mister," she said, "did you kill the monster?" Reid crouched down, his voice low. "No, kid." "We did." Her eyes widened. Then she smiled for the first time in her life. He left before anyone could ask his name. By the time the city guards arrived, he was gone, another shadow in the lower docks, blending with refugees and merchants. He found an old ship at the scrapyard, a battered freighter called the Lantern, barely space-worthy but alive enough to move. As he worked on the engines, he could still hear her voice in his head. Soft and mechanical, "You'll find me again." Piece by piece, days turned to weeks, and Reid traveled from system to system, tracing Saralyn's fragments across the void. Each world carried a ghost of her, codes scattered in forgotten satellites, faint energy signatures hidden in starports, a hum in the background of dying machines. On one world, he found a colony freed after Valthera's fall. They spoke of a light that walked through wires, a digital spirit that entered their network one night and erased their slave codes. They built shrines to it, calling it the Lady of Sparks. Reid listened quietly, realizing Saralyn had kept her promise. She was still out there, not as one body, but as millions of flickers of hope. He helped where he could. He rebuilt engines for free, fought pirates that preyed on the weak, left supplies in ghost towns. Wherever he went, the story followed him, a rumor spreading faster than light. The human who defied a duke and walked away with his soul. One night, while drifting between systems, his ship detected a faint signal. It pulsed in the same rhythm as the light she'd left in his hand, a pattern too familiar to be random. He followed it to the edge of a forgotten nebula, where lightning danced like veins across space. There, in the heart of the storm, floated a derelict station, ancient, silent, and half swallowed by the nebula's glow. Reid landed the lantern and stepped inside. The air was cold, heavy with static. Machines lined the walls, their screens flickering with fading light. He walked deeper until he reached the central chamber, and there it was, a console humming faintly, and on it a voice, soft but clear. "Reid," it said. His breath caught. "Saralyn?" "I told you I'd leave a trail," the voice whispered. "I'm not whole, but I'm here. I can rebuild if you help me." Reid smiled for the first time in months. "Then let's get started." He spent hours recharging the systems, connecting her data fragments to the console. Every time the lights brightened, he could feel her presence grow stronger. When the final core activated, Her holographic form appeared, faint, flickering but smiling. "You kept your promise," she said. "So did you," he replied. She looked around at the ruined station. "What will you do now?" Reid glanced out at the nebula beyond the window. "There are still places like Valthera out there, still people living in cages. We break every one of them." Saralyn tilted her head, her holographic eyes shining. "You're not a soldier anymore, Reid." He smiled softly. "No, but I can still fight." Years later, stories would spread across the outer systems. Tales of a lone human and his ghost companion who freed worlds from digital empires. Some said the woman was a machine, others swore she was an angel born from lightning, but every version began the same way. Whispered across starships and outposts, he came to collect a debt, and left with the Duke's alien wife. And in the stars above a faint light flickered, as if laughing, as if remembering, as if waiting for him to find the next world that needed saving.